When I speak of cancer, I speak of our journey because we've been through it together. I don't know that I'd be here without him, to be honest, because he's just amazing.
Hi, this is Patrick.
And this is Laura.
And you're listening to This is Cancer.
Brought to you by Siteman Cancer Center at Barnes Jewish Hospital and Washington University School of Medicine in St. Louis. National leaders in cancer. Do you ever meet those couples, Patrick, that you talk to them for just a few minutes and you can just tell how much they love each other?
Yeah, and Pam and Charlie were definitely one of those couples. They've been married for over 40 years, and they support each other throughout the entire episode and would kind of tag in and out of the conversation. And they're a great team, which I think served them well because Pam went through a really tough case of cancer.
Yeah, Pam was diagnosed in her 20s with a rare genetic disease called Peutz-Jeghers. I'd never heard of that before, and it apparently makes you really susceptible to cancer, and even more so, cancers throughout your digestive system. She's had polyps removed throughout her life, and then she ended up with thyroid cancer in 2018, which they removed her thyroid, and then in 2021, she was having discomfort and some blood in her stool, getting really weak, and they find out that she has pancreatic cancer. Thanks to a new clinical trial and her doctors, Dr. Lim and Dr. Doss, she was here with us to tell the story.
It's an incredible story. I'm really excited for people to listen to it. Just very encouraging to hear how far we've come and how far Siteman continues to kind of push the ball downfield when it comes to these clinical trials.
And I think if there's anyone out there that is a caregiver, you're going to take something from this episode too. So today we have our first married couple on the podcast. Pam and Charlie, thank you so much for coming today.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
There's a lot of layers to your story, and we're going to get into them all today. I think it's amazing that the pancreatic cancer that was found a couple years ago was only found because of a rare genetic disease that was discovered when you were in your 20s. Can you tell us more about that?
Sure. I was 21, had some severe cramping or pain, and went to the hospital and had some surgery. And the doctor told me I had Peutz-Jeghers syndrome, which means you have polyps throughout your colon or your small your GI tract. So we did genetic testing and found out for sure.
I see.
And so what did that mean when you had genetic testing? They said you have Peutz-Jeghers. What did that mean for your going forward? How do you deal with that?
Well, every 2 years I have an upper endoscopy and colonoscopy, since I was 21, of course. And we learned a lot about it and found out it can cause you to have cancer.
Wow.
Many different cancers.
Okay.
So far I've had thyroid cancer and pancreatic cancer.
So when you say it can have you, are there specific cancers it makes you prone to, or just you are prone to cancers in general?
Pretty much cancers in general.
Man.
Yeah, along those lines, breast cancer is another one that is more prevalent with Peutz-Jeghers, and she's on going back to one of your other podcasts, she's a high-risk patient for breast cancer, so she goes every 6 months for either the MRI or the mammogram as a result of that also.
That's a lot of testing.
That's a lot of, we say prevention, but really some of those are prevention and some of those are early detection. So you're getting the colonoscopies for early detection, which is key in survival, which is a huge thing when it comes to your diagnosis a couple years ago when you found out you had pancreatic cancer.
Right.
So a lot of people don't find out they have pancreatic cancer until they're in their late stages because it's very difficult to detect.
Correct.
So in a sense, this horrible genetic disease that you've had, but finding out that you had it, saved your life.
It's a blessing. Yes.
But let's talk a little bit about when you found that out and what was going on when you found out that you had pancreatic cancer.
June 1st, we were going to take a trip. We were going to Denver to spend time with his sister and stop at our son's on the way. I was constipated, uncomfortable, very uncomfortable. I started bleeding. I didn't say anything because I'm like, what are we going to do now? I should have gone home, but I didn't want to. We hadn't seen her in a few years, and we wanted to see her. And so I kept my mouth shut. And I just had to sit down every 5 minutes. Of course, you're in Denver, and the altitude's different.
Denver,
it was hard. I couldn't move. I couldn't do anything. And then I told Becky, his sister, who is a nurse. She's like, oh, I think Charlie needs to know this. So we came home and called the doctors immediately and went right in the next day.
23rd of September, we saw Dr. Lim first.
Who's an oncologist.
Who's the oncologist. And then we saw Dr. Hawkins, at which point he identified that it was really stage 3 because it was an aggressive, locally advanced aggressive adenocarcinoma in the head of the pancreas. It had surrounded the aorta and the mesenteric veins to the degree that it was inoperable at that particular point as it was. Mm-hmm. And so we asked them, what do we do? And they gave us all of the options. Obviously, we didn't want to do palliative care. We said, okay, how do we beat this? How do we go after it?
Right.
And with Dr. Lim and Dr. Hawkins, they identified a program. It was a very aggressive program, but it needed to be if they wanted to shrink that tumor to make it operable and possibly do the Whipple or potentially, and it turned out, to removal of the entire pancreas. So, if they could get it that far.
You had the chemo first.
Right.
And how long was that?
Six.
Started September 30th, and the last one was December 16th. That was 6 cycles on a 2-week cycle.
Every 2 weeks?
Every 2 weeks.
Okay.
And Dr. Lim made it very clear that to be successful, the success will improve if you can maintain the schedule. But the problem is it's hell on the body. It was so hard on her, but she knew this was the path.
Yeah.
So when you finished chemo, you persevered, you got through it. They got that tumor down to a size in which allowed them to do this incredibly complicated Whipple surgery.
Right. Well, before the surgery, we had to do immunotherapy.
We were fortunate.
This
is probably I think the key to her surviving is Dr. Lim and Dr. Hawkins' team had just initiated a immunotherapy clinical trial, which it's called CDX 1140, which is and actually CDX 301 also, which is, at least my understanding of this, and Dr. Lim will correct me, but pancreatic cancer cells are practically invisible to your immune system. So when you get it, they can go anywhere, and that's why, when it spreads, people don't know because your immune system can't see it. Mm-hmm. Well, this CDX 1140 excites those cells at any invader in your body, by the way, and which is one of the side effects of the immunotherapy, but she made it through wonderful. And the purpose of the study was to see if pancreatic cancer would be a candidate for this treatment. And that's why they wanted patients that were getting the Whipple or a resection of the pancreas, because they wanted to go in and look at, did it do its thing? She was one of the early, I think the first stage 3 patient that was subject to this treatment.
Wow.
And
that was still a clinical trial.
It was still in clinical trial. So she was, a very early patient. They had done it a couple times on 4s, but not on a 3 that had been through chemotherapy. They wanted to see, can they do it? And it was very painful, and they warned us. But we got through, and you go 14 days after that, you have to have your surgery.
I also need to mention that it's time to come clean that this is not Charlie, this is Bill Nye the Science Guy, and that's who you're actually listening to.
It's so funny, isn't it? You start reading a couple of those, like I remember when I hit your point with my father had cancer, where I could rattle off the drugs, the study number. I'm reading the studies, and they're making sense to me now. Getting to the point where, like, yeah, I understand that term. I know what a jejunum is. You're like, man, I think I've been at war for a little while here. Weird scars that turn themselves into knowledge like that. What phase was the study?
It was the initial phase.
It was the initial
phase. Phase 1.
You were the first. It was phase 1. The first time that you were testing a stage 3 pancreatic patient.
Correct.
They'd done stage 4.
Not a lot of patients, though. They had the sample size was 24 patients.
Okay.
And there are, I think, 2 patients from being done with the study now. But they have seen similar results.
So after the surgery, the nurse came to the room and said, do you want to hear the good news or the bad news? And I said, give me the good news.
Yeah.
There is no sign of cancer whatsoever.
That's some good news.
That's pretty good news.
Wow.
There was no bad news.
There was no bad news. And were there reservations for you doing this clinical trial, going into it, because of the pain it was going to cause you after you'd just gone through chemo?
No. I had to do it. Yeah. I wanted to be here for my family.
Yeah, and we wanted her here, so.
I trust him, and he's read everything. He's like, explained it all to me, and I'm like, well, we can't not do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I trust him now.
Yeah, the survivor rate on what she had was not real good. 20% after a year, 7% after 2. It was not a good.
Well, what was the alternative, Pam?
Well, you die.
Right. Right.
I wasn't willing to go there, but I did trust the doctors immensely.
And this is the perfect example of why clinical trials are so very important.
Right.
Oh, I will tell you, if you're going in for cancer, sign up for those clinical trials. Research those clinical trials. Find out what's going on. Ask your doctors.
Real quick, because I want to talk to you more about the support, Pam, that Charlie gave you and your children. So the plan was they were going to shrink the tumor first with chemo.
Yes.
And then they performed a Whipple surgery.
Correct.
And people may have heard Whipple from Grey's Anatomy, but they don't really know what that is. So can you tell us what a Whipple surgery is?
Okay. Yeah, I'd be glad to.
And why does it sound like a dessert?
Right.
Yeah, I wondered that myself, but I don't know the story behind the Whipple. But what they do is they either do a partial resection or a complete resection of the cut out the pancreas.
That's fascinating.
That's what I was going to say. I thought you couldn't live without your pancreas.
You can't.
Well, she's just look at it.
I know, but I was almost sure that you could. That's why people always passed away from pancreatic cancer, because they can't remove your pancreas.
And it's relatively new, and there's a medication called Creon, which are the enzymes that help her digest her food. She takes 4 with each meal, and then 1 or 2 at snacks, depending upon that, and that will help her digest her food.
Every time you eat, you have to
every
take
time she
eats. Every time I eat.
Hey, well, you know what?
I'm still here.
Yeah.
What was the recovery like for that extensive of a surgery?
It was not fun.
Yeah.
He had to take care of me constant. I mean, I don't know how he did everything he did. He was amazing.
And I should mention, I can just see, Charlie, I know it's difficult for you to still even go back. I mean, this is only a year and a half, almost 2 years. We're about a year and a half away. That just knowing what you could be losing had to have been your biggest motivating factor.
Yeah, what was so hard during all of this is Omicron was peaking during the surgery. Delta was just peaked. Her immune system was shot. So we were on quarantine because her immune system was shot. So it was hard.
Did either one of you ever think, I'd rather switch places?
No.
Oh, yeah.
No. Yeah. Even my brother said he would rather switch places with me. I'm like, you guys can't even consider this. This is my journey, and I will do it. When I speak of cancer, I speak of our journey because we've been through it together. I don't know that I'd be here without him, to be honest, because he's just amazing.
It is 100% true that it affects the spouse as much as it does the patient.
Oh, yeah.
Charlie's having a moment here, and I'm going to let him have it. I reached out to some friends of mine whose husbands are also caregivers, and I asked them a couple of questions, and I wanted them to be able to share from their perspective what it was like caring for their wives. So I'll play this for you now.
The hardest thing is you can't fix it. That was a real issue for me. I always try to fix things, and you just, you find out they have cancer, and you just can't fix it. You just got to be there. You love them, you listen to them, let them vent. It's not fair, but there's nothing you can do to rationalize it or to change it. So you just got to deal with it.
If there's any advice that I would give someone who's dealing with their partner going through cancer treatment right now, it would be, it's okay to cry. It's okay to be vulnerable. And, I think as a man, you grow up in this society, that, you're supposed to be tough. You're not supposed to show those emotions. Well, it's okay to let those out. And I think, what the most interesting thing that I learned from this was is surrendering to that vulnerability actually gives you power and gets you through the experience.
That last item is very, very important. When I got into a car to go to the store, that's when I would break down. You need to realize it is an emotional time.
But for me, he was a rock. I didn't know. I mean, I knew he was going through this, but he would never tell me about
the surgery.
that.
Mm-hmm. But, it's, going up to the store, get something, where I was by myself in the car.
Yeah.
That's when you let your guard down. And like the gentleman just said, that is, you need to, and I should have done, I couldn't do it more with her. She needed me to be strong.
Yeah, I'm sure you did all you could. It's like getting out of a car after a race. You've been locked in to do a job so intently for so long that when you leave the house, it just comes out.
Oh, it just explodes.
Did you struggle internally in staying positive? Did you ever have the days of, what else am I going to have to face?
Oh, sure. I have those days. But one really, I think it's a pretty amazing thing, and maybe I'm silly, but on our second chemo, we were driving to chemo, and I had this weird experience. It just makes me happy. We're driving to chemo, and there's this open field, and there's this deer, beautiful deer with the longest antlers I'd ever seen, just going up to heaven, and the sunbeams coming right down on him. As we drove by, he turned and looked at me. And my heart and in my head, I heard God say, have faith. I've got you. From then on, it was like I knew I'd be okay. I knew I would be just fine. So, yes, I have the dark days because with Pancreatic, you're always thinking, well, what's next? When is it really going to get me? But he keeps me grounded.
Charlie, how did you get through all of this fear of losing her and then the stress of taking care of her and being alone during most of it?
Boy, that's a hard one. By taking care of her, quite frankly, I wanted her around. And whatever was necessary, I would do. And the team, the more time we spent with the Siteman team, the more confident I felt, we can beat this. And we did. Yeah, one of the amazing things is when Dr. Lim came in and talked to us after the surgery and the pathology was read, he indicated that they had never seen the total absence of the cancer in the pancreas and everything else they took out in the 18 lymph nodes. Zero. They had not seen that type of results. So the combination of the chemotherapy and the immunotherapy and pointing hard at both, it was a miracle.
That's exactly the word I was looking for, Charlie. This is miracle level stuff. You've got, a Peutz-Jeghers syndrome that leads to finding out that you've got this cancer. You've got stage 1 goes to stage 3. You're going through chemo. It wasn't going to be operable. You knock the cancer back with chemo. You prime the body with immunotherapy. You go in for Whipple surgery. I mean, it's a clinical trial. You're the first to get it at stage 3. I mean, you need to buy lottery tickets. You should be going to Vegas tomorrow. It's a level of success that, it's astounding through all these phases of treatment.
That's what's so
the
amazing.
The smile on their faces, when they revealed no cancer. And then last week when Dr. Lim said, we're going to switch over to the survivorship program now, wow. Yeah.
They're high-fiving too.
I'm thinking 5 years for survivorship. He says, nope, you're ready.
That's incredible.
That's awesome.
Wow.
That's awesome.
I can tell you I hugged Dr. Lim when it was all over.
I don't know how to say this, but thank you is not enough for what Dr. Lim and Dr. Das and Dr. Hawkins had done for my wife. it brings tears to my eyes that we can celebrate another anniversary. We can do those types of things in the future, spend time with our grandchildren and whatnot. And it's because what Dr. Lim and Dr. Das, what they did made her being here reality.
Well, joining us now is Dr. Doss, a Washington University gastroenterologist, and Dr. Lim, who is a Washington University medical oncologist. Thank you so much for joining us both today.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
We were having a little bit of conversation before this, me asking, wait a minute, Dr. Doss, you're a gastroenterologist, but we're talking about a pancreas. So what did you tell me to kind of get me on the right track?
Well, the pancreas is one of the organs in the gastrointestinal tract. The gastrointestinal tract is any organ that helps you convey food through your body and help you absorb nutrients. And so the pancreas is one of those organs. And so my primary role in my specialty within Siteman and WashU is in the diagnosis, staging, and the palliation of cancers of the gastrointestinal tract, which includes the esophagus, the stomach, the pancreas, the liver, the bile duct, the colon, and everything in between.
So not just the stomach or the tummy, Laura.
Well, I was thinking colon because we talk so much about getting like colonoscopies and
Right.
head stuff. And I'm curious because I'm this uneducated about it. Dr. Lim, do most people ask you, what does my pancreas do?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so can you give us like a layman's term of what our pancreas does for our body?
So the pancreas has two major functions. One is to regulate our glucose in the system. So it secretes insulin or glucagon. These are hormones that will help us regulate our glucose at a certain level. The other major function is to produce and secrete pancreatic enzymes, which will be put into the intestinal tract to help us break down and digest food.
So it's very important.
Yes.
Well, I'll take that. I like to ask the question for the average listener, which would be me.
Imagine an organ that is full of meat tenderizer and that secretes just the right amount of meat tenderizer depending on whether or not you decide to eat a fatty piece of beef or kale salad or whatever else. And the other function is to make sure that your blood sugars are good.
And if you can't digest that explanation of what a pancreas does, then I don't know what to do for you.
Exactly. Although I will say when I hear diabetes, I think of kidneys, but your pancreas is crucial for making your kidneys work correctly. Is that right?
One of the long-standing effects of having long-term diabetes that's not well controlled is damage to the kidneys. But the kidneys actually in themselves are not primarily involved in the regulation of blood sugars.
Do you want to just go all out and start asking what the liver does and
I don't
what
know.
the lungs do?
I feel these are questions that I need to ask on behalf of most of the unmedically trained population.
Okay.
But thank you for explaining that. Okay, so we both already spoke with Pam and Charlie, and Pam was describing her surgery, which I think we referred to as the Whipple, but it actually was a full, what was the word you used again?
A total pancreatectomy.
A total pancreatectomy.
Nice.
Thank you. I did not know you could live without your pancreas, and I almost didn't believe Pam when she said it. I'm like, wait, I thought you couldn't live without that. And she's like, I think I know what happened.
It's true. You did like a full stop double take on that.
Right.
And I did too. I mean, I'm very interested to hear how exactly people are able to live without a pancreas.
So there are some organs that you can, live without, or sections of which you can remove and not have significant, damage to. And patients, as you were kind of alluding to, frequently will ask me, "Well, can you live without a pancreas?" Just like you asked. So don't feel bashful. You're in very good company.
Thank you.
And there are situations that are even not in the setting of cancer where we may recommend a person get a total pancreatectomy. But life without a pancreas, as Pam will tell you, is not easy because you no longer, as Dr. Lim was mentioning, have the ability to secrete insulin or glucagon. So your blood sugar regulation becomes very, very tricky. And you're not making the enzymes required for digestion. And so you have to be careful in supplementing yourself to actually do that. But to answer your question, yes, you can live without a pancreas, but it is quite challenging, as she can tell you better than anyone.
Do we know at what point in time that became a real possibility? When was that? Because growing up, living without a pancreas wasn't an option. I mean, one of my best friends growing up, his father had pancreatic cancer, and he was gone by Christmas that year. As far as I can remember, it was unfortunately thought of as like a death sentence.
Well, the Whipple surgery is named after a Dr. Whipple, who was a surgeon at Columbia University in the first couple of decades of the 20th century. And if you believe that they did the first Whipple surgery, under ether in what we would consider a very primitive kind of surgical environment. And that's how it's derived. That's why it's called a Whipple surgery. It's named after a surgeon. And so it's been done for a long time, but how effective it was in ultimately reducing pancreas cancer risk, recurrence rates, has evolved over time as surgical techniques have evolved and as, medical oncologists evolved to actually help.
So Dr. Lim, going back to what Patrick even said, anytime I've heard of a pancreatic cancer diagnosis, most people think, well, that's it. There's nothing you can do. And how has that changed over the last few decades?
Over the last few decades, I think there are a few major changes. Number one is the surgical techniques, and we've learned from a long way since Whipple that was developed 100 years ago. Surgical techniques have improved, and secondly, supportive care around surgery have improved as well. So the third major improvement is the chemotherapy that we give before and after the surgery.
So for Pam, she had Peutz-Jeghers, which made her aware that she was already more at risk for getting certain cancers, right? And so that helped lead to us even finding that.
Correct.
What are the other precursors for people able to be getting screened for pancreatic cancer? Why else could some people be able to get it?
So we would screen patients for pancreas cancer for a variety of reasons. So one is if they have a hereditary syndrome that's, that would be associated with pancreas cancer. What that usually means is having a germline gene mutation, a mutation that they inherited. If you ask, what are the other things that, are in that general range of increased risk, a smoker. So, a smoker probably has a 2 to 3-fold increased risk of pancreas cancer. Interestingly, in a study out of Hopkins, they looked and they saw people who are married to people with pancreas cancer have a 2 to 3-fold increased risk of pancreas cancer. It's probably influenced by secondhand smoke and perhaps, the environment that people are living in.
What about, we've talked about this a little bit, but there are a large majority of patients that come in and get diagnosed and their outcome is not great because oftentimes it's found late because symptoms don't come up until late. Right. So can we talk a little bit about those symptoms and why it is so, I know a lot of cancers are deadly when caught late, but this one seems to be on the top of the list.
Right. So as Dr. Das mentioned, the pancreas is an organ that's deep-seated within our belly, so there's not a whole lot of symptoms until the tumor gets bigger. And the other peculiar part about the biology of pancreatic cancer is that it likes to sow seeds. It likes to spread out even at the very beginning. With 1-2 centimeters of pancreatic tumor, quite often we see that they're out there in the liver and the lungs and other places. So 60% of pancreatic cancer patients were diagnosed with vague symptoms at stage 4. And typically, if you ask these patients, when you trace back to a year or two prior, most patients will tell you that they have there's some vague, dyspepsia or some heartburn sensation, just feeling queasy for a little bit. And trust me, most people have those symptoms.
Yeah.
And you won't just automatically think about pancreatic cancer until it gets worse. So, which is when the disease has spread out and becomes surgically not manageable. So I think vigilance is one thing, having a clear understanding of family history and also life habits. As Dr. Das mentioned, smoking, being an alcoholic, recurrent gallbladder attacks, family history, and obesity. Those are all risk factors for pancreatic cancer.
Right. Dr. Lim, you mentioned when people come in, they're at late stage. In 2006, my grandfather was admitted into the hospital and he had Alzheimer's. And so a lot of times he might forget to explain his symptoms. And we got him to the hospital and they diagnosed him with pancreatic cancer and he was gone in a week and a half. But it was really that quick from the diagnosis. But he was walking around.
Right.
But with pancreatic cancer, it's just like one day you just kind of feel like crap and are desperate to see a doctor, right?
Right.
The majority of patients will present with advanced cancer and, chemo and, surgery will not be on the horizon. But there's also, work being done, about trying to target, what we call the metastatic niche or trying to identify once a cancer has actually managed to, let's say, set up shop in another place, how do we treat that cancer in that metastasized cancer in the liver differently than how we treat the cancer in the primary location, right? That's something I think we're developing and hopefully will kind of continue to progress in the number of years. Right. The second point to your point, I agree. People should not think of pancreas cancer as a death sentence in 2023. We do have a lot to offer them. But your larger point that also should be made and should be thought about by anybody as they're kind of thinking about their health is when you are becoming aged, when you are turning 80 or 85 or 90 or 95, and if you are, not overall in the best of health, you have to also consider these are patients that I frequently will see I may have a real conversation with them about what is it that they want, what is it that they are hoping to achieve, what is it that their goals are. Do they want to be worked up for a cancer diagnosis? Are they interested in kind of having aggressive therapies, or will they be a candidate for these kinds of aggressive therapies? And so I oftentimes describe to patients that you're kind of like on a highway oftentimes, and this is when you start seeing me, you're getting on an off-ramp to kind of figure out a diagnosis, find a cancer. And you have to really, take ownership a little bit of your own health and what you're interested in kind of pursuing or not pursuing at different stages of your life and different stages of your health.
To your point about pancreatic cancer is not a death sentence in 2023, a couple days ago, a former colleague of mine posted on Facebook and described a journey that she's been on for the last, I would say, about 10 months. My friend Madeline said that she had been undergoing some testing at a previous hospital in 2022, and they couldn't point out what was going on. So she went onto the Siteman website and asked a question if maybe she could get in there to get a call. And the next day, she got a call from one of the surgeons on your team, and they asked for her to come into it, get a CT scan. And they said, you're probably not going to hear anything before the holidays. But the next day, Dr. Das, you gave her a call to tell her that she did in fact have pancreatic cancer that was not being diagnosed before. And by January 9th of this year, she was getting chemo. And in May of this year, she had the Whipple surgery. And so I had asked her if she would send a little voice recording about her experience and what the surgeons found after her Whipple surgery, just to kind of sum up her success with this. And I'm going to play that for you now.
Once they got in there, they found that the chemo had taken almost complete, there was a complete response, almost a complete response to the chemo. And my 4.4 centimeter tumor had shrunk 2.6 centimeters, and my surgeon took care of the rest. My surgeon also told me that my tumor was growing about 1 centimeter per month. So had I not made the transition to Siteman, my friends would be planning my funeral. This is a very unforgiving, aggressive disease, and I am truly blessed that I've beaten some serious odds. And I know that's because of great medicine. And I also know that it's legions of people who are praying for me. And I mean that quite honestly. There were so many things that people told me, oh, no, nobody survives pancreatic cancer. I want to be one of those people who proves them wrong.
So, Dr. Das, do you remember her case? Her name was Madeline.
I remember her very well because it was around the holidays, and she'd been kind of worked up and had several unsuccessful biopsies and procedures to try to figure this out, and they couldn't. And I was debating, and I always debate this, like, do you want to ruin a person's Christmas or their Thanksgiving? But I knew that she would want to know because, she'd been struggling to trying to figure out, what was going on with her, and so. I called her, and I remember telling her, like, I'm going to darken your doorstep and ruin your holiday, but I just want to tell you this so that I can start you on this journey and actually start the therapy that's going to hopefully get you, cured.
I think that's incredible that you prioritized it like that you gave her the clarity that she needed after struggling for so long so she could actually do something about it.
Yeah. I mean, she's incredibly grateful for that message I played. It was actually 8 minutes. Madeline, you're a talker. She said it was the entire team. It was everybody. She feels like she's a walking miracle.
Madeline had a great response. Her tumor went from 4 centimeters to 0.6. This happens, I would say, in 1 out of 5 patients.
Wow.
In the other 2, you see no change in the tumor. And 2 out of 5 people will have the tumor getting bigger towards the end. And then you're able to convert a small percentage to surgery, or you're able to shrink the tumor. So our thought is, how do you help the other 4 patients out of 5 to get a better response? So this is challenging, but we always have people finding ways to make it more effective and at the same time lowering the side effects.
This is going to air in November, which is Pancreatic Cancer Awareness Month. What has you both excited about the future of having more successes at the end of the day? What are you seeing coming down the line, or something that's really inspiring you about treating this disease?
We're just starting to see we're at the very, very beginning of, potentially getting blood-based pancreatic cancer screening. I would say that they are not ready for prime time yet, it has both, a lot of false positives and false negatives. And I think they're working on that, in time to see, especially in high-risk patients, how to kind of apply that. But that to me is something I'm really hopeful and thankful for in 2023 in the world of pancreas cancer screening.
Dr. Lim, what about you? What makes you hopeful?
There are a few things that are really exciting in the past, I would say 5-6 years. Number one is immunotherapy. So if you think about chemotherapy, that's a way of, I think about is cancer as us treating a lawn full of weeds. So chemotherapy is a combination of weed killers that you apply to the lawn. Yes, you can kill some degrees of the weeds, but the lawn will be hurt. So immunotherapy is a way of getting the body to engage in the battle. So you are strengthening the lawn, so we can help with additional chemotherapy. You're able to help, eliminate the weeds. So we have seen some success, including a lot of studies done or where the science originated from WashU and that we brought to the clinic. We have seen that for reasons that we still don't understand, that patients who otherwise would be gone within the short months, they live for years before something happened and then they succumb to the disease. So we are beginning to see some signals that immunotherapy can be tweaked or can be administered in certain ways to get a body to help control the cancer.
Your department just recently received a SPORE grant, is that correct?
Correct.
And tell me more about that.
So SPORE grant stands for Specialized Program of Research Excellence. It's basically a grant that is awarded from the National Cancer Institute to an institution to run clinical trials based on science done at that institution. So we are fortunate to have a renewal. We had one a few years ago, and then this is like a part 2 of it.
Is it pretty competitive to get that grant?
It is extremely competitive. So the NCI has, I think, 40 spores per year at any stage.
And you guys have 3 of them, three of 40.
So 40 spore throughout the whole country.
Wow.
And it's based on budget by the NCI.
There's a lot of downstream, effects also of the spore. So the spore not only, supports these, excellent clinical trials and translation from bench to bedside, but in addition, attracts incredibly good faculty from around the country who may be interested in pancreas cancer and growing a community of researchers and a community of people, multidisciplinary people into it, and maybe even inspire people to kind of go into it.
Well, I want to thank you both for coming here and answering these questions, and I think for giving hope to a cancer that has not historically had any. It's just 2 stories of people that are still alive thanks to advancements in clinical trials and treatments.
And congratulations on the SPORE grants. I mean, it's very encouraging to hear what's going on at Siteman, to talk to physicians such as yourself, and to hear these advancements in something that these 2 dummies on this side of the table up until about a week ago thought was a death sentence.
Right. It's clearly not, and we hope that it's given some hope for those of you out there, if not for a cure, but for different areas of treatment. Mm-hmm. And hopefully we'll be talking in 10 years about all those things you were mentioning, Dr. Das. Yeah. So thank you both for being here.
Thank you
for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to This is Cancer.
Brought to you by Siteman Cancer Center at Barnes Jewish Hospital and Washington University School of Medicine in St. Louis.
National leaders in cancer.
For more information on Siteman Cancer Center, go to siteman.wustl.edu and be sure to leave us a review and like and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.